Aristotle began his metaphysics with the pronouncement, "All men by nature desire to know." When you hear this, you might get the impression that Aristotle believed that everybody likes to study. But read further. He goes on to say, "An indication of this is the delight we take in the senses. For even apart from their usefulness, they are loved for themselves, and above all others, the sense of sight. For not only with the view to action, but even when we are not going to do anything, we prefer seeing to everything else. The reason is that this, most of all the senses, makes us know and brings to light many differences between things." Aristotle's point is that the human mind by nature reaches out to grasp the world. We look, we touch, we remember, and we contemplate what we experience. We study for a reason. Books are a way to bring the faraway world closer to us. With the advent of modern communications, we can say the same thing about videos and electronic media. The desire to know, to find out what the world is like, is innate. But some people have it more than others. Leonardo da Vinci was perhaps the most unrelentingly inquisitive person in history. Here is the way Kenneth Clark describes him. Everything he saw made him ask why and how. Why does one find seashells in the mountains? How does a bird fly? What accounts for cracks in the walls? What is the origin of wind and clouds? How does the heart pump blood? Find out, write it down. If you can see it, draw it, copy it out. Ask the same question again and again and again. If you look at Leonardo's notebooks, I think you will be stunned at the incredible reach of his desire to know the world in all its detail. Leonardo's curiosity was matched by an incredible intellectual and artistic talent. But he wasn't intellectually perfect. I remember reading a biography of Leonardo as a child, and I was very disappointed that he rarely finished anything. He just kept moving from one project to the next. So intellectual perseverance was not one of his virtues. But maybe that just means that some people have too many talents. What is intellectual virtue? I became fascinated with this question in the early 90s. At that time, hardly any philosopher talked about intellectual virtue. Nobody talked about curiosity, open-mindedness, intellectual courage, intellectual humility, intellectual attentiveness, and thoroughness and carefulness. So I wrote a book called Virtues of the Mind, in which I developed a virtue theory that is broad enough to include intellectual virtues in the same theory as moral virtues. And I then used the theory to address the central questions in epistemology. What is knowledge and justified belief? We won't be talking about epistemology in this course, but I want you to see why I think that the intellectual virtues are just as important as the moral virtues. And I think that fundamentally, almost all of the intellectual virtues arise from the same basic motivation, the motivation to get the truth about the world for ourselves and for others. We need to believe the truth for almost anything else we want, and we need other people to believe the truth also. False beliefs hurt us. Some intellectual virtues function primarily to protect us from false beliefs, virtues like intellectual attentiveness, carefulness, and thoroughness. Other virtues open our minds to more truths about the world than we would have otherwise. Virtues like curiosity and inquisitiveness are like that. But I think all of the intellectual virtues arise from a motive to get truth and avoid falsehood. Here are some key intellectual virtues. Curiosity is the desire to find out what exists, why it exists, and how it works. A closely related virtue is inquisitiveness, or the disposition to ask questions over and over again. Getting part of an answer is not enough. Getting an answer to one question leads to another question. Young children are naturally inquisitive. Unfortunately, as we grow older, we tend to become less inquisitive. Maybe that's because we had trouble getting answers to our questions when we were younger. But that means we need a proper regard for the difficulty in getting genuine knowledge, and that leads to two more virtues. Intellectual humility is facing up to the truth about oneself, neither overvaluing nor undervaluing one's abilities and accomplishments. The intellectually humble person acknowledges her intellectual limitations. She does not deny her accomplishments, but she's more concerned about the truth than her status. That also means that she gives intellectual credit where it is due. If she gets an idea from another source, she recognizes that when she puts forth the idea in her class papers or published work. The intellectually humble person knows that she might be wrong, and that leads to another virtue. Open-mindedness is the readiness to step outside one's own point of view, to consider the merits of other perspectives, with a willingness to change one's mind when that is warranted. Open-mindedness follows from a genuine love of truth and the humility to admit that one might be mistaken in one's beliefs. There's plenty of evidence that people are usually not open-minded. For instance, there are studies that indicate that most people, and I'm sorry to say, even college professors, people with PhDs, read or view only the media outlets that are dominated by their own political views. If they happen to read an article by someone on the other side of an issue, they get mad. I think it is because human beings want the world to be a certain way, and they don't want to hear any reason to think otherwise. That might seem odd when the belief they want to be true is negative. Why would people want bad news to be true? Actually, it's easy. Suppose you dislike the administration in office. You will then be quick to believe bad economic news and will resist evidence against your belief. I've seen this again and again, going back decades. Or suppose you believe that most people are racist. Or instead, you believe that racism is very uncommon. Your response to evidence of racism will be very different in each case. I noticed that in reactions to the publicity about an OU fraternity's racist chant. Some people not only concluded that the chanters are racist, but were quick to conclude that fraternities are racist, or that OU students in general are racist, or that Oklahomans are racist. But I also know people who interpreted the same evidence as an aberration and looked for conditions that excused the participants. But we can't just believe what we want to believe. Intellectual humility makes us realize that we might be wrong about a lot of things. Open-mindedness makes us look at reasons for and against a belief, whether or not we want to look at it. Remember that Aristotle thought that virtue is a mean between extremes. Does that apply to the intellectual virtues? I think it does. Take open-mindedness. I think there is such a thing as being too open-minded. Open-mindedness forces us to think about the importance of different perspectives on the same issue. But at some point, we need to stop looking at perspectives and decide what we believe the truth to be. Life is short, and we aren't going to get all points of view about every subject, and we wouldn't want to anyway. Part of being a person is having one's own conscientiously developed point of view. Anybody who really treats all points of view as equal is not a person. So I do think that there is such a thing as excessive open-mindedness. What about excessive curiosity? It is interesting that Aquinas treated curiositas as a vice. In English, we have different words for the wrong kind of curiosity: nosiness or being intrusive on other people's privacy. Is it really true that it is good for all of us to know everything going on in the world? Probably not. But then there must be limits to the virtue of curiosity. Can there be excessive intellectual humility? I think that one is easy. An excessively humble person is one who does not take credit for her intellectual accomplishments. Some people are quick to denigrate themselves in front of others, and maybe even in their own minds. I don't think that can be a virtue. What are the names for excessive humility and excessive open-mindedness and excessive curiosity? From time to time, I will mention the possibility that there are virtues and vices without names. If you keep a list, we can look at them together later in the course.